Tonight, we journey back through the mists of deep time to a moment when the world was reshaping itself and us along with it. 300,000 years ago, give or take a few millennia, something extraordinary was stirring across the vast landscapes of Africa. The air was different then, heavy with possibility and change. The rains fell in patterns we can barely imagine today, and the grasslands stretched endlessly under skies that had never known the smoke of cities or the hum of engines. In this ancient world, our ancestors were walking, not quite us, but no longer what they once were. They moved with purpose across savannas that pulsed with life, their footsteps marking a journey that would span hundreds of thousands of years. Each step carried them closer to becoming something new, something that would one day look up at the stars and wonder. But let's slow down. Let's breathe in that ancient air and feel the warm earth beneath our feet. Because this is not just a story about evolution or fossils found buried in distant caves. This is the story of how you came to be sitting here, listening to these words, your mind capable of imagining times and places you've never seen. It's the story of the long, winding path from our earlier selves to the complex beings we are today. Picture this. The sun rises over the African continent 300,000 years ago. The light catches morning dew on endless grass, and in the distance, figures move across the landscape. They are tall, upright, with hands that can shape stone and eyes that see patterns in the world around them. These are the last of Homo Erectus and the first whispers of something new. They have been walking this earth for nearly 2 million years, these hardy travelers. Their feet have carried them out of Africa and across Asia, all the way to the islands of what we now call Indonesia. They have mastered fire, learned to cook their food, and developed tools that help them hunt and gather. In many ways, they are successful beyond measure, but success, as we'll discover, is not the same as arrival. The climate 300,000 years ago was restless. Ice ages came and went, like slow, massive tides, each one reshaping coastlines and forcing life to adapt or perish. Africa itself was a patchwork of environments, from dense forests to open grasslands, from lakes that appeared and vanished to rivers that carved new paths through ancient stone. In this changing world, small groups of Homo erectus found themselves facing new challenges. Food sources shifted with the climate. Predators adapted to new hunting grounds. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, those who survived began to change as well. The changes were subtle. A slightly larger brain here, a more refined tool there. The ability to communicate more complex ideas around the evening fire. These weren't dramatic leaps, but gradual shifts, like a river slowly carving a canyon, grain by grain, year by year. Imagine one particular evening, perhaps 250,000 years ago. A small group has made camp near a water source, as their ancestors have done countless times before. The fire crackles softly, casting dancing shadows on faces that are familiar yet somehow different from those who came before. One of them picks up a piece of ochre, that red earth that seems to call to something deep within the human spirit. Instead of simply using it for practical purposes, perhaps to treat a wound or mark territory, they begin to make patterns with it, lines and dots that seem to mean something, though what exactly we may never know. This moment, multiplied across thousands of camps and hundreds of generations, marks the beginning of something profound. The birth not just of art, but of symbolic thinking, the ability to let one thing represent another, to create meaning beyond the immediate and practical. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's step back and walk more slowly through this transformation. The world 300,000 years ago was populated by several different human species. Homo erectus, as we've mentioned, had spread far and wide. In Europe, the Neanderthals were already establishing themselves as masters of Ice Age survival. And somewhere in the heart of Africa, a new branch was quietly emerging on the human family tree. These early Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, didn't announce their arrival with fanfare. They appeared gradually, their fossils scattered across the continent like breadcrumbs marking an evolutionary path. At sites like Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, Omo Kibish in Ethiopia, and Florisbad in South Africa, their bones tell a story of gradual change and increasing sophistication. Their skulls were rounder than their predecessors, with higher foreheads that housed slightly larger brains. Their faces were flatter, more like our own, but perhaps most importantly, their minds were beginning to work in new ways. They were developing the capacity for abstract thought, for planning beyond the immediate future, for creating complex social bonds that could span vast distances and generations. Let's walk with one of these early groups as they move across the landscape. The morning is cool and mist rises from a nearby river. The group is small, perhaps 20 or 30 individuals, including children whose laughter occasionally breaks the morning stillness. They move with purpose, but without haste. The adults scan the horizon constantly, reading signs in the landscape that speak of water, food, danger, and opportunity. The children learn by watching, their young minds absorbing lessons that have been passed down through countless generations. As they walk, they communicate, not just with simple gestures and basic vocalizations, but with an increasingly complex language that allows them to share not just immediate needs, but stories, plans, and ideas. They can describe things that are not present, plan for events that have not yet happened, and pass on knowledge that extends far beyond their own experience. This ability to share complex information is crucial to their success. Unlike their predecessors, who relied primarily on individual learning and simple imitation, these early Homo sapiens are developing culture in the truest sense. They can build upon the discoveries of previous generations, creating a growing body of knowledge that makes each successive group more capable than the last. The tools they carry reflect this growing sophistication. Where earlier humans might have used simple hand axes that remained virtually unchanged for hundreds of thousands of years, these people craft specialized tools for specific tasks. They have scrapers for preparing hides, points for hunting, and blades for cutting. Each tool represents not just technical skill, but the ability to plan and think abstractly about the tasks they will need to perform. But tools are just the beginning. As the group settles for the night, we can observe behaviors that speak to deeper changes in their minds and hearts. They share food not just with their immediate family, but with the group as a whole, following complex social rules that ensure everyone's survival. They care for the sick and elderly, investing resources in individuals who cannot immediately contribute to the group's survival, but who carry valuable knowledge and experience. Around the fire, they tell stories, not just practical information about where to find food or how to avoid danger, but tales that bind the group together, that help them understand their place in the world, that give meaning to their existence beyond mere survival. These stories are the beginning of something profound. They represent the emergence of symbolic thought, the ability to use language and imagination to create shared meanings that exist beyond the physical world. This capacity for abstraction will prove to be one of the defining characteristics of our species. As the fire burns lower and the group settles in for sleep, we can imagine the dreams that visit them. Unlike their predecessors, who might have dreamed only of immediate experiences, these early Homo sapiens are beginning to dream in symbols and metaphors, their sleeping minds processing not just the day's events, but the deeper patterns and meanings that connect all things. The transformation from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens was not a single event, but a process that unfolded over hundreds of thousands of years. It happened in different places at different times, as isolated populations faced unique challenges and opportunities. Some groups developed larger brains, others more sophisticated tools, still others more complex social structures. Gradually, these various innovations began to spread and combine. Groups that had been separated for thousands of years came back into contact, sharing their discoveries and learning from each other. The result was a species that was not just physically different from its predecessors, but mentally and culturally transformed as well. By 200,000 years ago, the transformation was largely complete. Homo sapiens had emerged as a distinct species with capabilities that set them apart from all previous humans. They could think abstractly, plan for the future, create complex tools, develop sophisticated languages, and build social structures that could span vast distances and generations. But emergence is not the same as dominance. For tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens shared the world with other human species. Neanderthals thrived in Europe's challenging climate. Homo erectus continued to populate parts of Asia. And in remote corners of the world, other human species persisted in their own ecological niches. The early Homo sapiens faced constant challenges. Climate change continued to reshape their world, forcing them to adapt or perish. Competition with other human species and with dangerous predators tested their survival skills. And the very sophistication that gave them advantages also created new vulnerabilities. Their larger brains required more energy, making them dependent on high-quality foods that were not always available. Their complex social structures, while providing many benefits, also created opportunities for conflict and division. Their growing reliance on culture and technology meant that knowledge could be lost if not carefully preserved and transmitted. Yet they persevered. Small groups spread slowly across the African continent, adapting to new environments and developing new strategies for survival. Some learned to exploit coastal resources, becoming skilled at gathering shellfish and perhaps even venturing onto the water in simple watercraft. Others specialized in hunting large game on the open savannas or gathering plant foods in forested regions. Each environment presented unique challenges and opportunities, shaping the development of different populations in subtly different ways. The result was not a single, uniform human type, but a diverse species with many local variations and specializations. As we follow these early humans through their daily lives, we can see the seeds of everything that would come later. The curiosity that drove them to explore new territories would eventually lead their descendants to populate the entire globe. The creativity that inspired them to create the first art and music would flower into the rich cultural traditions we see today. The cooperation that allowed them to survive in small groups would eventually enable them to build cities and civilizations. But all of that lies in the future. For now, in this ancient world of 300,000 years ago, they are simply trying to survive and thrive in a challenging and ever-changing environment. They are learning to be human, one day at a time, one generation at a time. The sun sets over the African landscape, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Our early ancestors settle around their fires, their voices carrying across the evening air as they share the day's experiences and plan for tomorrow. In their eyes, we can see the spark of intelligence and imagination that will one day reach for the stars. But tonight, they are content to tend their fires and tell their stories, knowing that each day brings new challenges and new possibilities. They are becoming us, step by careful step, breath by precious breath, in a journey that will span hundreds of thousands of years and transform not just themselves, but the entire world. The journey we're following is not one of straight lines or simple progress. It unfolds like a river meandering through a vast landscape, sometimes rushing forward, sometimes pooling in quiet eddies, always finding its way towards something new. 200,000 years ago, the world was a place of endless possibility and constant change. The great ice sheets that periodically covered much of the northern hemisphere were retreating once again, and Africa was experiencing one of its periodic transformations. Lakes appeared where none had existed for millennia. Rivers carved new paths through ancient rock. And across this shifting landscape, our ancestors continued their slow dance of adaptation and discovery. They were no longer the same people who had first emerged 300,000 years earlier. Generation by generation, almost imperceptibly, they had been changing. Not just in body, though their skulls had grown rounder and their faces more refined, but in something far more profound. Their minds were awakening to new possibilities. Picture a morning perhaps 150,000 years ago. The sun rises over what we now call the Kalahari, but then it was a land of scattered lakes and flowing streams. A group of perhaps 40 people has made their camp on a rise overlooking one of these ancient waters. The morning mist drifts across the surface, and somewhere in the distance, the call of a water bird echoes across the stillness. These people look much like us. If you could somehow transport one of them through time and place them in modern clothes, they might pass unnoticed on any street today. But their world is vastly different from ours, and in many ways so are their minds. They possess something their ancestors lacked, something that would prove to be perhaps the most important development in human history. They can imagine things that do not exist. They can think about tomorrow, next season, next year. They can remember not just where they found food yesterday, but patterns of abundance that span years and decades. As the camp stirs to life, we can observe behaviors that would have been impossible for earlier humans. A young woman tends to an elderly man who can no longer hunt or gather effectively. By any purely practical measure, he is a burden to the group. Yet they feed him, shelter him, and listen carefully to his words. Why? because they understand something profound about the nature of knowledge and experience. This old man has lived through droughts that the younger members of the group have never seen. He remembers the subtle signs that precede seasonal changes, the migration patterns of animals across decades, the locations of water sources that appear only in certain years. His mind is a library of survival knowledge accumulated over a lifetime, and the group recognizes its value. Around the morning fire, he shares what he knows. Not just practical information, but stories that encode complex understanding about the world. He tells of the time when the great herds moved differently, when the rains failed for 3 consecutive years, when his grandfather's grandfather discovered a new way to make tools from the special stones found near the eastern hills. These stories are more than entertainment. They are the beginning of human culture in its deepest sense. They represent the capacity to preserve and transmit knowledge across generations, to build upon the discoveries of the past, and to prepare for futures that have not yet arrived. But storytelling around the fire is just one aspect of their growing sophistication. As the day unfolds, we can observe other remarkable behaviors. When they craft tools, they do so with an understanding of the properties of different materials and the requirements of specific tasks. They select stones not just for their immediate usefulness, but based on how they will perform under different conditions. A young man carefully shapes a spear point, testing its balance, adjusting its weight. He is not simply copying what he has seen others do, but thinking through the physics of projectile flight, the anatomy of his intended prey, the likely scenarios he will encounter during the hunt. This level of abstract thinking, of mental modeling of complex systems, represents a cognitive leap that sets these people apart from all previous humans. The women of the group demonstrate equally sophisticated thinking as they gather plant foods. They know not just which plants are edible, but when they will be at their peak nutritional value, how to process them to remove toxins, and how to store them for future use. More remarkably, they can predict the availability of different food sources based on subtle environmental cues, planning gathering expeditions days or even weeks in advance. But perhaps most striking of all is how they communicate. Their language has grown rich and complex, capable of expressing abstract concepts, hypothetical scenarios, and emotional states. They can describe not just what is, but what might be, what was, and what should be. Listen to their conversations around the evening fire. They debate the best routes for tomorrow's hunt, weighing different options based on weather patterns, animal behavior, and the capabilities of different group members. They share observations about the changing seasons, comparing this year's patterns to those of previous years. We sit and they plan ceremonies and celebrations for future occasions, coordinating complex social activities that will strengthen bonds within the group. Most remarkably, they speak of things that exist only in their minds. They tell stories of spirits and ancestors, of forces that shape the world beyond the visible and tangible. These are not mere superstitions, but early attempts to understand and explain the deeper patterns of existence. They represent the birth of abstract thinking, of the human capacity to create meaning beyond immediate survival needs. As night falls and the stars emerge overhead, something magical happens. Instead of simply noting the positions of celestial bodies for navigation purposes as their ancestors might have done. These people see patterns and stories in the sky. They create narratives that connect the movements of stars to earthly events, developing the first astronomical traditions. An elder points to a particular constellation, telling the story of how it came to be. The tale weaves together observations about seasonal changes, animal migrations, and human experiences into a coherent narrative that helps the group understand their place in the cosmic order. This is mythology in its earliest form, humanity's first attempt to create meaning from the vast complexity of existence. But these developments are not happening in isolation. Across Africa, in scattered groups separated by hundreds or thousands of miles, similar transformations are taking place. Each population faces unique challenges and develops its own solutions, its own innovations, its own cultural traditions. Along the coast of what is now South Africa, some groups are learning to exploit marine resources. They gather shellfish at low tide, developing sophisticated understanding of tidal patterns and seasonal abundance. They create the first shell beads, piercing small holes with remarkable precision and stringing them into necklaces and bracelets. These ornaments serve multiple purposes. They are beautiful, satisfying some deep human need for aesthetic expression. They mark identity, indicating membership in particular groups or achievement of certain status. And they facilitate trade, serving as valuable commodities that can be exchanged for other goods across vast distances. The creation of these beads represents several cognitive breakthroughs. It requires the ability to envision the finished product before beginning work, to plan a sequence of precise actions, and to invest time and effort in creating something with no immediate survival value. It demonstrates the emergence of symbolic thinking, the capacity to imbue objects with meaning beyond their practical function. Meanwhile, in the highlands of Ethiopia, other groups are developing different specializations. They learn to work with obsidian, that volcanic glass that can be knapped into blades sharper than modern surgical instruments. They establish trade networks that carry these precious tools hundreds of miles from their sources, creating some of humanity's first commercial relationships. The obsidian trade requires sophisticated social organization. It demands the ability to maintain relationships across vast distances, to establish trust with strangers, and to coordinate complex exchanges that might take months or years to complete. It represents the emergence of economic thinking, the understanding that resources can be accumulated, exchanged, and invested for future benefit. In the forests of Central Africa, yet other populations are developing their own innovations. They learn to work with wood and plant fibers, creating tools and containers that leave little trace in the archaeological record, but represent equally sophisticated technological achievements. They develop techniques for processing plant toxins, expanding their dietary options and allowing them to thrive in environments that would challenge other populations. Each of these regional developments contributes to the growing complexity of human culture, but they also create new challenges. As groups become more specialized, they become more dependent on their particular environments and technologies. They develop distinct languages, customs, and worldviews that can make communication with other populations difficult. Yet somehow, connections persist. Genetic evidence suggests that throughout this period, There was ongoing contact between different African populations. People moved between groups, carrying genes, technologies, and ideas across vast distances. This genetic and cultural mixing prevented the complete isolation of populations and ensured that innovations developed in one region could eventually spread to others. The result was not a single, uniform human culture, but a complex mosaic of related traditions that shared certain fundamental characteristics while maintaining regional distinctiveness. This pattern of unity in diversity would become one of the defining features of human civilization. As we follow these early humans through their daily lives, we can see the emergence of recognizably human behaviors and institutions. They develop increasingly complex social hierarchies based not just on age and physical strength, but on knowledge, skill, and spiritual authority. They create rituals and ceremonies that bind groups together and mark important transitions in individual and community life. They begin to modify their environment in subtle but important ways. They use fire not just for cooking and warmth, but as a tool for landscape management, burning grasslands to encourage the growth of preferred plant species and to create better hunting grounds. They establish semi-permanent camps at strategic locations, returning to the same sites as season after season and gradually modifying them to better serve their needs. Most importantly, they develop increasingly sophisticated ways of sharing and preserving knowledge. The stories told around the fire become more elaborate and structured, encoding complex information in memorable forms that can be passed down through generations. They create the first mnemonic devices, using songs, dances, and visual symbols to help preserve important cultural knowledge. These developments set the stage for everything that would follow. The cognitive and cultural foundations laid down during this period would enable their descendants to spread across the globe, to develop complex technologies, and eventually to create the civilizations we see today. But all of that remains in the future. For now, in this ancient world of 150,000 years ago, they are simply learning to be fully human. They are discovering the power of imagination, the value of cooperation, and the importance of cultural transmission. They are creating the first human communities in the truest sense, bound together not just by kinship and immediate survival needs, but by shared stories, values, and dreams. The night deepens over Africa, and our ancestors settle into sleep around their fires. In their dreams, they visit places they have never seen, imagine futures they will never experience, and continue the endless human work of making meaning from existence. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities. The climate will continue to change, forcing adaptations and migrations. New technologies will be discovered and refined. Social structures will evolve to meet changing needs. And slowly, generation by generation, they will continue their transformation into the complex, creative, endlessly curious beings we have become. But tonight, they rest peacefully under the ancient stars, their fires burning steadily through the darkness, their stories echoing in their dreams. They are becoming us, one breath at a time, one story at a time, in a journey that will span continents and millennia and ultimately lead to this very moment, when we can look back across the vast expanse of time and recognize ourselves in their struggles, their discoveries, and their dreams. The transformation we've been following was not happening in isolation. While our ancestors in Africa were developing these remarkable new capabilities, the world itself was changing around them. The great ice sheets that had covered much of the northern lands were beginning their slow retreat once again, and with this shift came new opportunities and new challenges. 100,000 years ago, the climate was entering another period of instability. The monsoon rains that had nourished Africa for millennia began to shift their patterns. Rivers that had flowed for thousands of years started to dry up. Lakes that had supported countless generations of wildlife began to shrink and disappear. For our ancestors, this was both crisis and opportunity. The changing climate forced them to adapt, to find new ways of surviving in an increasingly challenging world. But it also opened new pathways, new corridors of possibility that had been closed for tens of thousands of years. Picture the scene as one group faces this changing world. They have camped for generations near a lake that has been the center of their territory, the anchor point around which their entire way of life revolves. But now, season after season, the water level drops. The abundant fish become scarce. The animals that once came to drink at the lake's edge move elsewhere, following the retreating waters. The elders of the group remember their grandparents' stories of times when the lake was smaller, when their people had to travel farther for water. But those stories seemed like ancient history, tales from a different world. Now, suddenly, they are living that history. The group faces a choice that has confronted human beings countless times throughout our history. They can cling to familiar places and familiar ways, hoping that conditions will improve. Or they can venture into the unknown, carrying their knowledge and their culture with them as they search for new homes. This particular group chooses to move, not all at once, not in a desperate flight, but gradually, thoughtfully, as scouts explore new territories and report back on what they find. Some head north, following rumors of rivers that still flow year-round. Others turn east, toward distant mountains where the rains might still be reliable. As they prepare for these journeys, we can observe behaviors that would have been impossible for earlier humans. They don't simply pack up and leave. They plan. They consider multiple routes, weighing the advantages and risks of each. They coordinate with other groups, sharing information about distant territories and establishing agreements about hunting grounds and water sources. Most remarkably, they prepare their children for a world they themselves have never seen. Around the evening fires, they tell stories not just about the past, but about the future. They describe the challenges the young ones might face, the skills they will need, the kinds of environments they might encounter. These stories are more than entertainment or even education. They are acts of imagination, attempts to prepare minds for possibilities that exist only in potential. This capacity to think beyond immediate experience, to model future scenarios and prepare for contingencies, represents a cognitive achievement that sets our species apart from all others. The journeys these people undertake are not simple migrations. They are explorations, systematic attempts to map new territories and understand new environments. Small groups of scouts range far ahead of the main party, returning with detailed reports about water sources, food availability, potential dangers, and possible shelters. These reports are not just verbal descriptions, but complex mental maps that encode vast amounts of information. A scout might describe not just the location of a water source, but its seasonal reliability, the quality of the water, the types of animals that frequent it, and the defensive advantages of nearby high ground. This information is then discussed, analyzed, and integrated into group decision-making processes. As they travel, they maintain contact with the groups they've left behind through an increasingly sophisticated communication network. Smoke signals carry messages across vast distances. Carved symbols left at strategic locations provide information for those who follow. Trade relationships ensure that valuable goods and crucial information continue to flow between separated populations. These communication networks represent another cognitive breakthrough. They require the ability to think abstractly about information transfer, to develop standardized symbols and protocols that can be understood across different groups and over extended periods of time. They demonstrate the emergence of what we might call proto-writing, the first systematic attempts to encode complex information in permanent, transferable forms. The groups that survive these migrations are not necessarily the strongest or the most numerous. They are the most adaptable, the most innovative, the most capable of learning from new experiences and applying that knowledge to novel challenges. They develop new tools for new environments. It's new hunting strategies for unfamiliar prey, new social structures to cope with the stresses of constant travel and uncertainty. Along the way, they encounter other groups of humans, some familiar, others startlingly different. These meetings are moments of profound significance, opportunities for the exchange of genes, ideas, and technologies that will shape the future development of our species. Sometimes these encounters are peaceful, leading to intermarriage, trade relationships, and the sharing of cultural innovations. Young people from different groups might join together, carrying the best of both traditions into new territories. Knowledge about tool-making techniques, food processing methods, and survival strategies spreads rapidly through these networks of human contact. But not all encounters are friendly. Competition for scarce resources can lead to conflict, forcing groups to develop new strategies for both warfare and diplomacy. They learn to assess the intentions of strangers, to negotiate agreements, and when necessary, to defend their territories and their people. These conflicts, difficult as they are, also drive innovation. The need for better weapons leads to advances in tool-making technology. The importance of group coordination in both hunting and warfare encourages the development of more sophisticated communication systems. The value of accurate information about enemy movements and intentions promotes the emergence of strategic thinking and intelligence gathering. Perhaps most importantly, these encounters with other human groups force our ancestors to develop a more complex understanding of their own identity. They begin to distinguish not just between friend and enemy, but between us and them, between the familiar and the foreign. This awareness of group identity becomes a powerful force for cultural cohesion and innovation. As these various groups spread across Africa and beyond, they begin to diversify in remarkable ways. Each population adapts to its particular environment, developing specialized tools, techniques, and cultural practices. Yet they remain connected through trade networks, intermarriage, and cultural exchange, creating a web of human relationships that spans the continent. In the highlands, some groups develop expertise in working with rare stones and metals. They create tools and ornaments of extraordinary beauty and functionality, trading them across vast distances for goods they cannot produce themselves. Their settlements become centers of technological innovation, attracting skilled craftspeople from across the region. Along the coasts, other populations master the arts of marine exploitation. They develop sophisticated understanding of tidal patterns, seasonal fish migrations, and oceanic weather systems. They create the first seaworthy watercraft, initially simple rafts and dugout canoes, but gradually more sophisticated vessels capable of extended voyages. These coastal peoples begin to think about water not as a barrier, but as a highway. They explore offshore islands, establish seasonal fishing camps on distant shores, and gradually develop the maritime skills that will eventually enable human beings to reach every habitable corner of the planet. In the forests, still other groups become masters of their green world. They develop intricate knowledge of plant chemistry, learning to extract medicines, poisons, and psychoactive compounds from hundreds of different species. They create tools and containers from wood and plant fibers that rival anything made from stone or metal. They establish sustainable relationships with their forest environments that allow them to thrive without depleting the resources they depend upon. Each of these regional adaptations represents a different solution to the fundamental challenges of human existence. But they also create new possibilities for innovation and cultural development. When these different traditions come into contact through trade or migration or intermarriage, the results can be explosive bursts of creativity and technological advancement. Imagine a meeting between a highland stoneworker and a coastal shell gatherer. The stoneworker has developed techniques for creating perfectly balanced projectile points, while the shell gatherer has mastered the art of creating precise holes in hard materials. When they share their knowledge, new possibilities emerge. The stone points can be hafted with greater precision, while the drilling techniques can be applied to working stone in entirely new ways. These kinds of technological exchanges happen constantly as human populations spread and interact. The result is an accelerating pace of innovation that distinguishes our species from all previous forms of life on Earth. For the first time in the planet's history, cultural evolution begins to outpace biological evolution as the primary driver of adaptive change. But this cultural acceleration comes with costs. As human groups become more specialized and more dependent on their particular technologies and environments, they also become more vulnerable to disruption. A drought that might have been survivable for a simple hunter-gatherer group can be catastrophic for a population that has developed complex dependencies on particular resources or territories. This vulnerability drives the development of increasingly sophisticated risk management strategies. Groups begin to maintain emergency stores of food and tools. They establish reciprocal relationships with distant populations, creating networks of mutual support that can be activated in times of crisis. They develop more flexible social structures that can adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Most importantly, they invest heavily in knowledge preservation and transmission. The stories told around the fire become more elaborate and more systematic, encoding not just cultural values and historical memories, but practical information about survival techniques, resource management, and crisis response. These oral traditions become humanity's first libraries, repositories of accumulated wisdom that can be drawn upon when needed. As we follow these developments across thousands of years and thousands of miles, we begin to see the emergence of recognizably human patterns of behavior and organization. The small, kin-based groups of earlier periods give way to more complex social structures based on shared culture, common interests, and mutual benefit, rather than just blood relationships. Trade networks become more extensive and more sophisticated, carrying not just goods, but ideas across vast distances. Standardized tools and techniques appear across wide areas, suggesting the existence of shared cultural traditions that transcend local variations. Specialized roles emerge within groups, with some individuals becoming recognized experts in particular skills or areas of knowledge. Religious and ceremonial practices become more elaborate and more standardized, creating shared frameworks of meaning that can unite diverse populations. These early religious traditions serve multiple functions, providing explanations for natural phenomena, establishing moral and social rules, creating mechanisms for group decision-making, and offering comfort and hope in times of difficulty. But perhaps most significantly, these populations begin to develop what we might call historical consciousness, the awareness that they are part of a larger story that extends both backward into the past and forward into the future. They begin to see themselves not just as individuals or even as members of particular groups, but as participants in an ongoing human adventure that transcends any single lifetime or generation. This historical consciousness becomes a powerful, motivating force, inspiring individuals to make sacrifices for future generations, to preserve knowledge and traditions that may not have immediate practical value, and to undertake projects that will benefit people they will never meet. It represents the emergence of genuine human community in the deepest sense, a shared commitment to the welfare and advancement of the species as a whole. As the sun sets over this ancient world of 100,000 years ago, we can see our ancestors gathered around their fires, no longer just struggling for daily survival, but actively working to build better futures for their children and their children's children. They are planning journeys to distant lands, developing new technologies, creating works of art and beauty, and telling stories that will echo down through the generations. They are becoming us, not just in body and mind, but in spirit and aspiration. They are learning to dream of possibilities beyond their immediate experience, to work toward goals they may not live to achieve, and to find meaning and purpose in the vast adventure of human existence. The night deepens around their fires, but the light of human consciousness burns brighter with each passing generation. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities, new discoveries and new questions. But tonight, they rest peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they are part of something larger than themselves, something that will endure long after their individual flames have been extinguished. The journey continues, step by step, breath by breath, generation by generation, toward a future none of them can fully imagine, but all of them help to create. They are walking the long road that leads from the African grasslands to the stars themselves, and every step they take carries us closer to our own destiny as a species capable of understanding our place in the vast cosmos and taking responsibility for our role in shaping its future. The wind carried new scents across the changing landscape, and with them came whispers of transformation that would reshape everything our ancestors thought they knew about the world. 75,000 years ago, the earth itself seemed to hold its breath, as if preparing for something momentous. In the heart of what we now call Indonesia, on an island called Sumatra, the ground began to tremble, not the gentle trembling of everyday earth movements, but something deeper, more ominous. The mountain called Toba was awakening from a sleep that had lasted the tens of thousands of years. When Toba erupted, it did not simply explode. It unleashed fury beyond imagination, spewing ash and rock and superheated gases into the sky with such violence that the very atmosphere seemed to catch fire. The ash cloud rose higher than any mountain, higher than the flight of any bird, climbing into the thin air where only stars had dwelt. But this was not just any volcanic eruption. This was a super eruption, an event so catastrophic that it would change the course of human history itself. The ash that poured from Toba's shattered peak darkened skies across half the world. It fell like gray snow across Asia, blanketed the Indian Ocean, and drifted on the winds all the way to Africa, where our ancestors looked up at darkened skies and wondered if the world was ending. For months, perhaps years, the sun struggled to penetrate the thick veil of ash that wrapped around the earth like a burial shroud. Temperatures dropped across the globe, plants withered in the artificial winter, animals fled or died, and humanity, still so young, so vulnerable, faced its greatest test yet. Picture the scene as news of the distant catastrophe reaches our African ancestors. They do not yet understand what has happened, cannot comprehend the scale of the disaster that has befallen the world. They only know that the seasons have gone wrong, that the rains have failed, that the animals they depend upon are disappearing. Some groups, caught in the worst affected areas, simply vanish from the record. Their fires grow cold, their camps fall silent, their stories end in the gray dust that settles over abandoned tools and empty shelters. The human population, already small, grows smaller still, but others adapt. They move to new territories, following the few remaining herds toward places where water still flows and plants still grow. They share resources more carefully, cooperate more closely, and pass on their knowledge more deliberately than ever before. In the crucible of near extinction, they forge the bonds and behaviors that will define our species for millennia to come. The groups that survive are not necessarily the largest or the strongest. They are the most cohesive, the most innovative, the most capable of working together in the face of overwhelming adversity. They are the ones who understand that in times of crisis, cooperation is not just beneficial, but essential for survival. As the volcanic winter slowly lifts and the world begins to heal, these survivor populations find themselves in a transformed landscape. Many of the territories their ancestors had inhabited for thousands of years are now empty. Their previous occupants lost to the catastrophe. New opportunities arise, new niches open up, new possibilities emerge. But the survivors themselves have changed as well. They carry within their genes and their cultures the memory of near extinction, the knowledge of how fragile human existence can be. This awareness shapes everything they do, driving them to build more resilient communities, to develop more sophisticated survival strategies, and to place greater value on the preservation and transmission of knowledge. In the aftermath of Toba, we begin to see accelerated cultural development across the surviving human populations. Tools become more sophisticated and more standardized. Art and symbolic expression flourish as people seek ways to express their experiences and preserve their memories. Trade networks expand as groups recognize the importance of maintaining connections with distant populations. Most significantly, we see the emergence of what archaeologists call behavioral modernity, the full flowering of distinctly human cognitive and cultural capabilities. The survivors of Toba are no longer just anatomically modern humans. They are behaviorally modern as well, possessed of all the mental tools and cultural institutions that will enable their descendants to spread across the globe and eventually build civilizations. But that global expansion lies still in the future. For now, in the immediate aftermath of the volcanic catastrophe, our ancestors are focused on rebuilding, on healing, on ensuring that humanity never again comes so close to the brink of extinction. The night sky, slowly clearing of volcanic ash, reveals familiar constellations that had been hidden for so long. Our ancestors look up at those ancient patterns of light and see in them symbols of continuity, reminders that even the greatest catastrophes eventually pass, that life finds a way to endure and flourish despite the most challenging circumstances. Around their fires, they tell new stories, stories about survival and resilience, about the importance of community and cooperation, about the need to preserve knowledge and pass it on to future generations. These stories become part of their cultural DNA, shaping the values and behaviors that will guide human development for thousands of years to come. As the decades pass and the world continues to recover, these survivor populations begin to expand once again. But they do so with greater caution, greater wisdom, and greater appreciation for the interconnectedness of all life. They understand now that they are part of something larger than themselves, part of a web of relationships that extends across space and time. The children born in the years following Toba grow up in a world that is both familiar and strange. The basic patterns of human life continue much as they always have, with the daily cycles of hunting and gathering, tool making and shelter building, storytelling and ceremony. But there is a new awareness, a deeper understanding of the fragility and preciousness of existence. These children learn not just the practical skills they need for survival, but also the cultural knowledge that binds their communities together. They memorize genealogies that stretch back to the time before the Great Darkness. They learn songs and dances that encode important information about seasonal patterns, animal behaviors, and environmental changes. They absorb moral teachings that emphasize the importance of sharing, cooperation, and mutual support. Most importantly, they develop what we might call historical consciousness, the ability to see themselves as part of an ongoing human story that extends far beyond their own individual lives. They understand that they are the inheritors of a legacy that has been passed down through countless generations, and that they have a responsibility to preserve and enhance that legacy for those who will come after them. This historical consciousness becomes a powerful driving force in human development. It motivates individuals to make sacrifices for the common good, to invest time and effort in projects that will benefit future generations, and to maintain cultural traditions even when their immediate practical value is not apparent. As we follow these post-Toba populations through their daily lives, we can see the emergence of increasingly complex social institutions. Leadership structures become more formalized, with certain individuals recognized as specialists in particular areas of knowledge or skill. Religious and ceremonial practices become more elaborate and more standardized, creating shared frameworks of meaning that can unite diverse communities. Trade relationships expand and become more sophisticated, with standardized systems of exchange and agreed upon measures of value. Those early economic institutions not only facilitate the movement of goods across vast distances, but also serve as mechanisms for maintaining social relationships and sharing information between distant groups. Perhaps most remarkably, we begin to see the development of what might be called educational institutions, formal systems for preserving and transmitting cultural knowledge. Certain individuals become recognized as keepers of tradition, responsible for memorizing and passing on the stories, songs, and technical knowledge that define their communities. These knowledge keepers undergo intensive training, spending years learning not just the content of their cultural traditions, but also the techniques for accurate memorization and effective transmission. They develop sophisticated mnemonic devices, using rhythm, melody, and visual imagery to encode complex information in forms that can be reliably preserved and passed on. The knowledge they preserve includes not just practical information about survival techniques and resource management, but also historical narratives, genealogical records, astronomical observations, and philosophical reflections on the nature of existence. These oral libraries become the foundation of human culture, repositories of accumulated wisdom that will guide human development for millennia to come. As these cultural institutions mature, they begin to generate their own momentum, driving further innovation and development. The need to preserve and transmit knowledge leads to advances in language and communication. The desire to mark important events and locations leads to the development of symbolic art and proto-writing systems. The requirement to coordinate complex social activities leads to increasingly sophisticated organizational structures. But perhaps the most significant development is the emergence of what we might call future-oriented thinking, the ability to plan and work toward goals that extend far beyond immediate survival needs. These post-Toba populations begin to undertake projects that will take generations to complete, to make investments whose benefits will accrue primarily to their descendants. They begin to modify their environments in systematic ways, using controlled burning to manage vegetation, constructing fish weirs and game drives to improve hunting success, and establishing seasonal camps at strategic locations. These activities require long-term thinking, careful planning, and sustained cooperation across multiple generations. Most remarkably, they begin to explore beyond the boundaries of their known world, not just in search of immediate resources, but out of curiosity about what lies beyond the horizon. Small groups of explorers venture into unknown territories, mapping new lands, discovering new resources, and establishing contact with previously unknown populations. These explorations are not random wanderings, but systematic efforts to expand human knowledge and capabilities. The explorers carry with them not just the tools and skills they need for survival, but also the cultural knowledge of their home communities. They serve as ambassadors and traders, establishing relationships that will benefit their people for generations to come. When these explorers return, they bring with them not just reports of distant lands and peoples, but also new ideas, new technologies, and new ways of thinking about the world. Their discoveries are carefully evaluated, discussed, and integrated into the existing body of cultural knowledge, contributing to the ongoing process of human development and adaptation. As the generations pass, these patterns of exploration and cultural exchange create an increasingly complex web of human relationships that spans vast distances and connects diverse populations. Trade routes carry not just goods, but ideas across continents. Marriage relationships create bonds between distant communities. Shared cultural practices and beliefs create networks of mutual understanding and cooperation. By 60,000 years ago, the world is no longer populated by small, isolated bands of hunter-gatherers struggling for mere survival. Instead, it hosts a complex mosaic of human communities, each adapted to its particular environment, but all connected through networks of trade, communication, and cultural exchange. These communities have developed sophisticated technologies for exploiting their environments, elaborate social institutions for organizing their activities, and rich cultural traditions for making sense of their experiences. They are no longer simply reacting to environmental changes, but are actively shaping their world, using their intelligence and creativity to improve their circumstances and expand their possibilities. The stage is now set for the next great chapter in the human story, the expansion beyond Africa and the colonization of the entire planet. But that expansion will not be a simple matter of following herds or fleeing disasters. It will be a deliberate, planned effort carried out by people who have the tools, the knowledge, and the cultural institutions necessary to succeed in entirely new environments. The survivors of Tuba have become something new, something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. They are not just another species of animal, however intelligent or adaptable. They are culture-bearing beings, capable of accumulating knowledge across generations, of cooperating on vast scales, and of deliberately shaping their own evolutionary future. As they gather around their fires on this ancient night 60,000 years ago, they tell stories not just of the past, but of the future, of lands they have never seen but hope to reach, of challenges they have never faced but prepare to meet, of possibilities they can barely imagine but are determined to explore. The night wind carries their voices across the darkened landscape, and in those voices we can hear the echo of our own dreams and aspirations. They are singing the song of human possibility, the endless human quest to understand, to explore, and to become more than we ever thought we could be. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities. The great expansion is about to begin, the slow but inexorable spread of human consciousness across the face of the earth. But tonight, They rest peacefully around their fires, secure in the knowledge that they have survived the greatest test their species has ever faced, and that they are ready for whatever comes next. The embers glow softly in the darkness, casting dancing shadows on faces that look so much like our own. In their eyes, we can see the spark of intelligence and imagination that will one day reach for the stars. But for now, they are content to tend their fires and share their stories, knowing that each day brings them closer to a future none of them can fully imagine, but all of them help to create. The wind grows quiet, and the stars shine down on this ancient world with their eternal light. Somewhere in the darkness, a child dreams of distant lands and endless possibilities. The journey continues, step by step, breath by breath, toward a destiny that will encompass the entire planet and eventually reach beyond it to the cosmos itself. But that lies far in the future. For now, there is only the present moment, the warm glow of the fire, and the quiet satisfaction of another day survived, another step taken on the long road that leads from our humble beginnings to our ultimate destination among the stars. The night embraces them gently, and in that embrace, humanity prepares for its greatest adventure yet. The great migrations were about to begin, though those who would undertake them could not have imagined the scale of the journey ahead. 60,000 years ago, the world was opening like a flower after a long winter. The ice that had locked away so much of the planet's water was retreating once again, revealing new coastlines, new river valleys, new pathways through landscapes that had been impassable for millennia. Our ancestors stood at the threshold of the greatest adventure in human history. They had survived the volcanic winter of Toba. They had developed the tools, the knowledge, and the social structures necessary to thrive in challenging environments. Most importantly, they had learned to dream of possibilities beyond the horizon, to plan for futures they could barely imagine. The first steps beyond Africa were tentative, experimental. Small groups of explorers ventured into the Sinai Peninsula, following ancient animal trails and seasonal water sources. They carried with them everything they had learned about survival, adaptation, and cooperation. But they also carried something else, something that would prove even more valuable than their tools or their knowledge of plants and animals. They carried stories. Picture a small band of perhaps 20 people as they crest a ridge and look out over a landscape unlike anything their ancestors had ever seen. Behind them stretches the familiar territory of northeastern Africa, with its known water sources, its predictable seasonal patterns, its well-understood dangers and opportunities. Ahead lies the unknown, a vast expanse of new possibilities and new challenges. The leader of the group, a weathered woman whose eyes hold the accumulated wisdom of countless generations, raises her hand and calls for a halt. This is a moment that requires thought, preparation, ceremony. They are about to cross a threshold that no human being has ever crossed before. They are about to become something new. Around their evening fire that night, the stories flow like water from a spring. The elders speak of the ancestors, of the great journeys that brought their people to this place, of the wisdom that has been passed down through countless generations. But tonight, the stories have a different quality. Tonight, they are not just remembering the past, but preparing for a future unlike anything that has come before. The children listen with wide eyes as the storytellers weave tales of distant lands, where the sun rises from different mountains, where strange animals roam through unfamiliar forests, where the very stars themselves might shine in different patterns. These are not stories of things that have happened, but of things that might happen, of possibilities that exist just beyond the edge of the known world. As the fire burns lower and the night deepens, the conversation turns to practical matters. What tools will they need for the journey ahead? What knowledge must they carry with them? How will they maintain contact with the groups they are leaving behind? These discussions are not hurried or anxious, but thoughtful and deliberate, the kind of careful planning that has enabled their people to survive and thrive for so many thousands of years. The decision to cross into new territory is not made lightly. It requires the consensus of the entire group, the agreement of the elders who carry the accumulated wisdom of the past, and the young adults who will bear the primary responsibility for the journey ahead. They consider the signs and omens, the seasonal patterns, the behavior of animals and birds that might indicate what lies beyond the horizon. When morning comes, they perform ceremonies that bind them together as a traveling community, that invoke the protection of the ancestors, that ask for guidance and wisdom in the challenges ahead. These rituals are not mere superstition, but practical psychology, ways of strengthening group cohesion and individual resolve in the face of uncertainty and danger. The crossing itself is almost anticlimactic, one step, then another, carrying them from the familiar into the unknown. The landscape changes gradually at first, then more dramatically as they move deeper into territory that no human eyes have ever seen. New plants, new animals, new geological formations that speak of different climatic patterns and different environmental challenges. But they adapt. This is what humans do, what their ancestors have been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. They read the signs in the landscape, learning to identify new food sources, new sources of water, new materials for tools and shelter. They modify their techniques and their strategies to meet the demands of new environments. Most importantly, they continue to tell stories. Each evening around their fire, they share what they have learned during the day, adding new chapters to the great book of human knowledge. They describe the taste of new foods, the behavior of unfamiliar animals, the properties of different stones and plants. These descriptions become part of their cultural memory, information that can be passed on to other groups who might follow in their footsteps. The journey is not easy. There are days when water is scarce, when food is hard to find, when the weather turns hostile. There are encounters with dangerous animals, accidents that injure group members, illnesses that slow their progress, but they persevere, drawing on reserves of knowledge and determination that have been building for countless generations, and they are not alone. As they move through these new territories, they encounter other groups of humans, some familiar, others startlingly different. These meetings are moments of profound significance, opportunities for the exchange of genes, ideas, and cultural innovations that will shape the future development of our species. Some of these encounters are peaceful, leading to intermarriage and the sharing of knowledge. Young people from different groups join together, creating new communities that blend the best traditions of multiple cultures. Trade relationships develop, carrying goods and ideas across vast distances. Languages evolve and merge, creating new forms of communication that can bridge cultural divides. Other encounters are more challenging. Competition for scarce resources can lead to conflict, forcing groups to develop new strategies for both warfare and diplomacy. But even these difficult interactions contribute to human development, driving innovations in technology, social organization, and conflict resolution. As our ancestors spread across the Middle East and into Asia, they begin to diversify in remarkable ways. Each group adapts to its particular environment, developing specialized tools, techniques, and cultural practices. Yet they remain connected through trade networks, intermarriage, and cultural exchange, creating a web of human relationships that spans continents. The pace of innovation accelerates as different populations encounter new challenges and opportunities. Groups that settle in mountainous regions develop expertise in working with stone and managing vertical landscapes. Those who remain near coastlines become masters of marine resources, developing the first sophisticated watercraft and navigation techniques. In the vast grasslands of Central Asia, some populations become specialists in hunting large game, developing new weapons and strategies for bringing down massive prey animals. Their success allows them to support larger populations, leading to the development of more complex social structures and cultural institutions. Meanwhile, in the forests of Southeast Asia, other groups master the arts of arboreal living, learning to exploit the rich resources of tropical canopies. They develop new tools for climbing and working at height, new techniques for processing plant materials, new understanding of the complex ecosystems that surround them. Each of these regional adaptations represents a different solution to the fundamental challenges of human existence, but they also create new possibilities for innovation and cultural development. When these different traditions come into contact, the results are often explosive bursts of creativity and technological advancement. The genetic evidence suggests that throughout this period of expansion, human populations remained relatively small and widely scattered. But what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in ingenuity and adaptability. They were learning to live in environments that had never hosted human beings before, developing new strategies for survival and prosperity in each new territory they encountered. By 50,000 years ago, human populations had spread across much of Asia, from the Mediterranean coast to the islands of Indonesia. They had learned to survive in deserts and mountains, in forests and grasslands, in tropical heat and near Arctic cold. Each environment had taught them something new about the possibilities and limitations of human existence. But perhaps the most remarkable development was not technological or environmental, but cultural. These far-flung populations had maintained their essential humanity, their capacity for language, art, ceremony, and social cooperation, despite being separated by thousands of miles and adapting to radically different environments. They remained recognizably human in their values, their aspirations, and their fundamental approach to life. The stories they told around their fires might describe different landscapes, different animals, different challenges. But the underlying themes remained constant: the importance of cooperation, the value of knowledge, the need to prepare for the future, the responsibility to preserve and transmit cultural traditions to the next generation. These shared values created a kind of invisible thread connecting human communities across vast distances, A trader traveling from the shores of the Mediterranean to the mountains of Central Asia would find in each community he visited people who shared his basic understanding of what it meant to be human. The languages might be different, the customs might vary, but the fundamental patterns of human social life would be recognizably familiar. This cultural continuity was not accidental, but the result of deliberate effort. Human communities worked hard to maintain connections with distant populations, sending messengers and traders across dangerous territories to exchange goods, information, and marriage partners. They told stories that linked their local experiences to broader human themes, creating narratives that could be understood and appreciated by people from very different backgrounds. Most importantly, they continued to innovate and adapt while preserving the essential core of human culture. They developed new technologies and new social institutions to meet the challenges of new environments, but they did so in ways that remained true to fundamental human values and aspirations. As the Great Expansion continued, our ancestors began to encounter environments that tested the limits of human adaptability. The journey to Australia, undertaken sometime around 65,000 years ago, required not just courage, but sophisticated planning and technology. The water barriers that separated Southeast Asia from the Australian continent could not be crossed by accident or luck. They required deliberate navigation, seaworthy craft, and the ability to maintain course over dozens of miles of open ocean. The success of this maritime venture demonstrates that by this time, human beings had developed not just the technical skills necessary for ocean travel, but the cognitive abilities required for complex planning and risk assessment. They could envision destinations they had never seen, prepare for challenges they had never faced, and coordinate group activities on a scale that had never been attempted before. The colonization of Australia also marked another significant milestone in human development, the first encounter with a completely alien ecosystem. The plants and animals of Australia had evolved in isolation for millions of years, creating a biological community unlike anything human beings had ever experienced. Our ancestors had to learn entirely new survival strategies, develop new tools and techniques, and adapt their cultural practices to meet the demands of a radically different environment. They succeeded brilliantly. Within a few thousand years, human populations had spread across the entire Australian continent, from the tropical north to the temperate south, from the coastal regions to the arid interior. They had learned to exploit resources that no other human populations had ever encountered, developed new technologies for working with unfamiliar materials, and created new cultural traditions that reflected their unique environmental circumstances. But success in Australia came at a cost. The arrival of human beings led to the extinction of many of Australia's large animals, creatures that had survived for millions of years, but could not adapt to the presence of skilled human hunters. This pattern would be repeated again and again as human populations spread to new continents, a reminder that our species' remarkable adaptability comes with responsibilities as well as opportunities. The expansion into Europe presented different challenges. The Neanderthals had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years, perfectly adapted to the cold climate and the rhythms of Ice Age life. They were not primitive beings waiting to be replaced by more advanced humans, but sophisticated people with their own rich cultures, their own technologies, their own ways of understanding and relating to the world. The encounter between modern humans and Neanderthals was one of the most significant events in human history. It was not simply a matter of one species replacing another, but a complex process of interaction, competition, and ultimately integration. Genetic evidence shows that the two populations interbred, creating hybrid populations that carried genetic contributions from both ancestral groups. This intermixing was not just biological, but cultural as well. Modern humans learned from Neanderthals about surviving in cold climates, about exploiting particular resources, about manufacturing certain types of tools. Neanderthals, in turn, may have adopted some of the innovations developed by modern human populations. The result was a new kind of human being, one that combined the cold weather adaptations developed by Neanderthals over hundreds of thousands of years with the cultural innovations and behavioral flexibility of modern humans. These hybrid populations became the ancestors of all non-African human populations, carrying within their genes and their cultures the legacy of both ancestral groups. As human populations continued to spread and diversify, they began to develop increasingly sophisticated ways of organizing themselves and relating to their environments. The small nomadic bands of earlier periods gave way to larger, more complex societies with specialized roles, formal leadership structures, and elaborate cultural institutions. Trade networks became more extensive and more systematized, carrying goods across entire continents and creating economic relationships that linked distant communities. Standardized tools and techniques appeared across wide areas, suggesting the existence of shared cultural traditions that transcended local variations. Religious and ceremonial practices became more elaborate and more standardized, creating shared frameworks of meaning that could unite diverse populations. These early religious traditions served multiple functions, providing explanations for natural phenomena, establishing moral and social rules, creating mechanisms for group decision-making, and offering comfort and hope in times of difficulty. Most significantly, human societies began to develop what we might call institutional memory, formal systems for preserving and transmitting cultural knowledge across generations. Certain individuals became recognized as keepers of tradition, responsible for memorizing and passing on the stories, songs, and technical knowledge that defined their communities. These knowledge keepers developed increasingly sophisticated techniques for accurate information storage and transmission. They used rhythm, melody, and visual imagery to encode complex information in memorable forms. They created elaborate mnemonic systems that allowed them to preserve vast amounts of cultural knowledge without any form of writing. The information they preserved included not just practical knowledge about survival techniques and resource management, but also historical narratives, genealogical records, astronomical observations, and philosophical reflections on the nature of existence. These oral libraries became the foundation of human civilization, repositories of accumulated wisdom that would guide human development for millennia to come. As night falls over this ancient world of 40,000 years ago, we can see our ancestors gathered around fires that now stretch from Africa to Australia, from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific shores. Each group faces its own particular challenges and opportunities, but all remain connected by the invisible threads of shared humanity. They have traveled farther and adapted more successfully than any species in the history of life on Earth. They have learned to live in every habitable environment on the planet, from tropical rainforests to Arctic tundra, from mountain peaks to ocean shores. They have developed technologies and social institutions of remarkable sophistication, created works of art and beauty that still move us today, and established cultural traditions that continue to influence human behavior. But perhaps most remarkably, they have maintained their essential humanity throughout this vast expansion and diversification. Despite being separated by thousands of miles and adapting to radically different environments, they remain recognizably human in their values, their aspirations, and their fundamental approach to life. The stories they tell around their fires might describe different landscapes and different challenges, but the underlying themes remain constant. The importance of cooperation and mutual support. The value of knowledge and wisdom, the need to plan for the future and prepare the next generation, the responsibility to preserve and transmit cultural traditions, the desire to understand their place in the larger cosmos. These shared values and aspirations are the true legacy of the great human expansion. They represent not just survival strategies developed for particular environments, but fundamental insights into what it means to be human. They are the foundation upon which all subsequent human achievements would be built. As the embers glow softly in the darkness and the stars wheel overhead in their eternal patterns, our ancestors rest peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they have successfully completed the greatest journey in human history. They have carried the spark of human consciousness from its birthplace in Africa to every corner of the habitable world. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities. The great expansion is not yet complete. There are still new lands to explore, new environments to master, new possibilities to discover. But tonight, they can rest in the satisfaction of knowing that humanity has proven itself capable of adapting to any challenge, of thriving in any environment, of maintaining its essential character while embracing endless diversity. The night wind carries their dreams across the continents they have conquered and the oceans they have crossed. In those dreams, we can see the seeds of everything that is yet to come, the civilizations that will rise, the technologies that will be developed, the art and literature and music that will be created, the scientific discoveries that will transform human understanding of the universe. But all of that lies in the future. For now, there is only the present moment, the warm glow of the fire, and the quiet satisfaction of another day survived, another step taken on the long journey that has carried humanity from its humble beginnings to its current position as the most successful and adaptable species the Earth has ever known. The journey continues, step by step, breath by breath, generation by generation, toward a future that none of them can fully imagine, but all of them help to create. They have given us the world, and in their courage, their ingenuity, and their endless capacity for adaptation and growth, we can see reflected our own potential for greatness. The night embraces them gently, and in that embrace, humanity prepares for whatever challenges and opportunities the future may bring. The fire burns steadily through the darkness, a symbol of the inextinguishable spark of human consciousness that will continue to burn as long as our species endures. The fire had become more than warmth, more than light piercing the darkness. 30,000 years ago, as our ancestors settled into their nightly rhythms across the vast territories they now called home, something extraordinary was stirring in their minds. The flames that danced before their eyes were no longer just tools for survival. They were becoming windows into worlds that existed only in imagination. Picture a cave high in what we now call the Pyrenees, where the winter winds carved through stone valleys and snow gathered in drifts that would not melt until spring. Inside this shelter, protected from the bitter cold, a small group has gathered around their fire. The light flickers across walls of smooth limestone, and in that dancing illumination, something magical is about to unfold. A woman reaches for a piece of charcoal from the fire's edge, her fingers wrapping around the blackened wood with practiced ease. But tonight, instead of using it to mark territory or kindle new flames, she turns toward the wall. Her hand moves slowly, deliberately, tracing lines that curve and flow like water across the pale stone. The others watch in silence, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. They have seen her do this before, this strange practice of making marks that seem to hold meaning beyond their simple existence. Tonight, though, feels different. Tonight, the marks are becoming something else entirely. The charcoal leaves its trail across the limestone, and gradually, miraculously, an image emerges. Not just random lines, but the unmistakable form of a horse. Its head held high, mane flowing, legs captured in mid-stride, as if frozen in an eternal moment of perfect motion. This is not mere decoration. This is not accident or idle scratching. This is art in its purest form, the human mind reaching beyond the immediate demands of survival to create something beautiful, something meaningful, something that speaks to desires and capabilities that no other creature on earth possesses. As the image takes shape on the wall, we are witnessing one of the most profound moments in human history. For the first time, our ancestors are not just observing the world around them, or adapting to it, or surviving within it. They are recreating it, transforming their experiences and memories into permanent forms that will outlast their own brief lives. The horse on the wall is not just any horse. It is every horse the artist has ever seen, every moment of grace and power and wild beauty distilled into a single, perfect image. It is memory made visible, experience transformed into something that can be shared with others, passed down to children, preserved across the generations. But this moment in the cave is just one small part of a much larger transformation taking place across the human world. From the ice-locked valleys of Europe to the sun-baked plains of Australia, from the dense forests of Asia to the windswept coast of Africa, our ancestors are discovering new ways to express the complexity and richness of their inner lives. In another cave, thousands of miles away, a man dips his hand in ochre mixed with animal fat and presses it against the stone wall. When he pulls his hand away, a perfect silhouette remains, a ghostly outline that seems to reach out from the rock itself. This handprint is more than a mark of presence. It is a declaration, a statement that echoes across the millennia. I was here. I existed. I mattered. These handprints appear in caves across the world, created by men and women and children whose names we will never know, but whose humanity reaches out to us across tens of thousands of years. Each print is unique, as individual as the person who made it, yet all are united by the same fundamental impulse to leave something of themselves behind, to claim a place in the eternal story of human existence. The art appearing on cave walls during this period is not crude or primitive, as earlier generations of scholars sometimes assumed. It demonstrates sophisticated understanding of anatomy, movement, and visual composition. The artists who created these works possessed keen observational skills and remarkable technical ability. They understood how to use the natural contours of cave walls to give their images dimension and life. More than that, they understood something profound about the nature of representation itself. They grasped that a few carefully placed lines could evoke an entire animal, that color and shading could suggest volume and texture, that art could capture not just the appearance of things, but their essential spirit and character. Watch as another artist, in a different cave in what would someday be called France, begins work on an image that will become one of the masterpieces of prehistoric art. Using a combination of charcoal and ochre, working by the light of burning animal fat, she creates the image of a bison. But this is no ordinary representation. The animal seems to move in the flickering firelight, its massive form appearing to breathe and shift as shadows dance across the uneven stone surface. The artist has used every tool at her disposal to bring this image to life. The natural bulge in the cave wall becomes the bison's powerful shoulder. A crack in the stone suggests the line of its back. The interplay of light and shadow, created by the irregular surface of the rock, gives the animal a three-dimensional quality that seems almost supernatural in the dancing flames. This sophisticated understanding of how to work with natural surfaces, how to use light and shadow, and the viewer's own perception to create illusions of depth and movement reveals minds capable of remarkable abstract thinking. These artists were not simply copying what they saw in the world around them. They were interpreting it, transforming it, creating new realities that existed only in the realm of art and imagination. But why horses? Why bison? Why the particular animals that appear again and again on cave walls across Europe and beyond? The answer lies not just in what these animals meant practically to our ancestors' survival, but in what they represented symbolically to their developing consciousness. The horse embodies grace, speed, and freedom, qualities that perhaps our ancestors admired and wished to capture for themselves. The bison represents power, endurance, and the fierce will to survive that humans needed in their challenging world. The mammoth, with its massive size and long tusks, might have symbolized the overwhelming forces of nature that humans were learning to understand, and in some small ways, to control. These images are more than art. They are the first chapters of human mythology, early attempts to understand and explain the relationship between humans and the natural world. In creating these images, our ancestors were not just decorating their living spaces or practicing their artistic skills. They were engaged in the fundamentally human activity of meaning-making, the search for significance and purpose that continues to drive human culture today. The caves where this art appears were not casual shelters or temporary camping spots. They were special places, chosen carefully for their acoustic properties, their hidden chambers, and their sacred atmosphere. To reach the painted galleries, visitors often had to crawl through narrow passages, wade through underground streams, or navigate treacherous drops and climbs. This difficulty of access was not accidental. It was part of the experience, part of what made these places special and set them apart from the ordinary world. The journey into the deep caves was a pilgrimage, a ritual passage from the everyday realm of hunting and gathering and survival into a different kind of space entirely, a place where the ordinary rules of existence did not apply. In these hidden chambers, illuminated only by flickering flames, surrounded by images of animals and handprints and mysterious symbols, our ancestors gathered for ceremonies and rituals whose exact nature we can only imagine. Perhaps they told stories that explained the meaning of the images on the walls. Perhaps they performed dances that mimicked the movements of the painted animals. Perhaps they inducted young people into the mysteries of adulthood, teaching them not just practical survival skills, but the deeper truths about what it meant to be human. The sounds in these caves would have been extraordinary. The slightest whisper would echo and re-echo through the chambers, creating an acoustic environment unlike anything in the outside world. When people sang or chanted or played primitive musical instruments, the caves themselves became part of the performance, adding their own voices to the human chorus. Archaeological evidence suggests that our ancestors did indeed bring music into these sacred spaces. Excavations have uncovered bone flutes, whistles, and simple percussion instruments dating to this period. These instruments, often made from the hollow bones of birds or the antlers of deer, could produce haunting melodies that would have filled the caves with sound as beautiful and mysterious as the images on the walls. Imagine the scene as a group gathers deep underground for one of these ceremonies. The cave walls flicker with the light of burning torches, revealing the painted animals that seem to move and breathe in the shifting illumination. Someone begins to play a bone flute, its clear, sweet notes echoing through the chamber and blending with the whispered conversations and quiet footsteps of the assembled people. As the music fills the space, the painted animals seem to come alive. The horses appear to gallop across the walls, their hooves beating in rhythm with the music. The bison lower their heads as if preparing to charge. The mammoths raise their trunks in what might be greeting or warning. In this magical environment, the boundary between art and reality, between the living world and the world of imagination, becomes beautifully, mysteriously blurred. But the caves were not the only places where our ancestors expressed their growing artistic sensibilities. They were also creating portable art, small sculptures, and decorated objects that they could carry with them as they moved across the landscape. These pieces, carved from bone and antler and stone, demonstrate the same sophisticated artistic vision that we see on the cave walls. One of the most famous examples is a small ivory carving, no bigger than a person's palm, discovered in what is now Germany. It depicts a human figure with the head of a lion, a creature that never existed in the real world, but lives vividly in the realm of human imagination. This tiny sculpture, created more than 30,000 years ago, represents one of humanity's earliest attempts to create images of supernatural beings, gods or spirits, or mythological creatures that existed only in the mind. The skill required to create such a piece is extraordinary. Working with simple stone tools, the artist carved intricate details into the hard ivory, creating a figure that is both powerfully realistic and utterly fantastical. Every line of the sculpture demonstrates not just technical mastery, but deep artistic vision, the ability to conceive of something that had never been seen and bring it into physical existence. These portable artworks served multiple purposes in the lives of our ancestors. Some may have been religious or ceremonial objects used in rituals and stored carefully between uses. Others might have been personal ornaments, worn as jewelry or carried as good luck charms. Still others could have served as trade goods, valuable items that could be exchanged for food, tools, or other necessities. But perhaps most importantly, these portable artworks served as connections, ways of maintaining cultural ties across the vast distances that separated different human groups. A carved pendant created in one region might travel hundreds of miles through trade networks, carrying with it not just economic value, but cultural information, artistic techniques, and symbolic meanings that helped bind together the far-flung communities of our ancestors. The development of artistic expression during this period was not happening in isolation. It was part of a broader flowering of human creativity and cultural sophistication that touched every aspect of our ancestors' lives. They were not just creating art. They were revolutionizing their tools, their social structures, their ways of understanding and relating to the world around them. The stone tools of this period show remarkable refinement and specialization. Instead of the simple, multi-purpose implements used by earlier humans, our ancestors were now creating tools designed for specific tasks. They had scrapers for preparing hides, burins for carving bone and antler, backed blades for cutting, and projectile points designed for different types of hunting. This specialization reveals minds capable of complex planning and abstract thinking. To create a specialized tool, you must first envision the task it will perform, understand the materials it will work with, and design its form to maximize its effectiveness. You must think several steps ahead, imagining not just the immediate use of the tool, but how it will perform under different conditions and over extended periods. Even more remarkably, our ancestors were beginning to create composite tools, implements made from multiple materials, combined to create something more effective than any single component could be. They hafted stone blades onto wooden handles using carefully prepared adhesives made from tree resins and animal glues. They created spear throwers that extended the range and power of their hunting weapons. They developed the first needles, allowing them to create fitted clothing that provided better protection against the cold. Each of these innovations required not just individual ingenuity, but cultural transmission of knowledge. The techniques for preparing adhesives, for selecting the right materials, for achieving the proper balance and proportion in composite tools, all had to be learned, practiced, and passed on to the next generation. This accumulation and transmission of technical knowledge is one of the hallmarks of human culture, one of the things that sets our species apart from all others. But the changes during this period went beyond technology and art. Our ancestors were also developing more sophisticated social structures, more complex ways of organizing their communities and relationships. The evidence suggests that they were beginning to develop specialized roles within their groups, with some individuals becoming recognized as expert tool makers, others as skilled hunters, still others as keepers of cultural knowledge and tradition. This specialization allowed for greater efficiency and higher levels of skill development. Instead of everyone needing to master every survival skill, individuals could focus their efforts on particular areas of expertise, developing abilities that benefited the entire community. A master tool maker could create implements of higher quality and greater effectiveness than a generalist. A skilled hunter could provide more food with less effort. A knowledge keeper could preserve and transmit cultural information more accurately and completely. But specialization also required new forms of social cooperation and organization. In a community where individuals depended on each other's specialized skills, maintaining harmony and ensuring fair distribution of resources became critical survival issues. This led to the development of more formal social structures with recognized leaders and established procedures for making group decisions and resolving conflicts. The evidence for these developing social structures comes partly from the art itself. Some of the cave paintings appear to have been created by multiple artists working together, suggesting coordinated group activities and shared artistic traditions. The similarity of artistic styles across wide geographic areas indicates cultural exchange and communication between distant communities. The sophistication of some images suggests that at least some individuals were able to devote significant time and energy to artistic pursuits, implying that their communities could support non-productive specialists. Trade networks during this period were becoming increasingly extensive and sophisticated. Exotic materials like high-quality stone, amber, and marine shells were moving hundreds of miles from their sources, indicating well-established routes of communication and exchange. These networks carried not just goods, but information, artistic techniques, and cultural innovations, helping to spread new developments rapidly across large areas. The expansion of trade networks had profound implications for human development. It meant that innovations developed in one region could quickly benefit communities across vast areas. A new tool-making technique discovered in what is now Spain could reach communities in Eastern Europe within a few generations. An artistic style developed in one cave could influence paintings in caves hundreds of miles away. More importantly, these trade networks created connections between distant communities that went beyond simple economic exchange. When traders carried goods from one region to another, they also carried stories, songs, and cultural knowledge. They served as bridges between different populations, helping to maintain the essential unity of human culture, even as it diversified across different environments and regions. The religious and ceremonial practices of this period were becoming increasingly elaborate and standardized, creating shared frameworks of meaning that could unite diverse populations across wide areas. The similarity of cave art styles and techniques across Europe suggests that at least some artistic and ceremonial traditions were shared across vast distances, possibly maintained through networks of specialized practitioners who traveled from community to community. These shared cultural practices served multiple functions in the lives of our ancestors. They provided explanations for natural phenomena that were otherwise mysterious and frightening. They established moral and social rules that helped maintain order within communities. They created mechanisms for group decision making and conflict resolution, and they offered comfort and hope in times of difficulty and uncertainty. But perhaps most importantly, these shared cultural frameworks gave our ancestors a sense of identity and belonging that transcended their immediate family groups. They could see themselves not just as members of particular communities, but as participants in a larger human story, inheritors of traditions that stretched back into the distant past, and contributors to a legacy that would extend far into the future. As night settles over this ancient world of 30,000 years ago, we can see the glow of fires scattered across the continents our ancestors have claimed as home. Each fire represents a community, a group of people bound together not just by kinship or immediate survival needs, but by shared culture, shared values, and shared dreams for the future. Around these fires, stories are being told that will echo down through the millennia. Children are learning not just practical survival skills, but the deeper truths about what it means to be human. Artists are creating works of beauty and meaning that will inspire and move people tens of thousands of years in the future. And so, as the ancient fires burn low and the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, we reach the end of our journey through deep time. 300,000 years have passed like whispers in the wind, carrying us from those first tentative steps in the African grasslands to the cave walls painted with dreams and memory. The transformation is complete now. Those early ancestors, walking upright across landscapes we can barely imagine, have become us, not just in bone and sinew, but in spirit and aspiration. They learned to dream beyond tomorrow, to see meaning in shadows on stone, to carry stories like precious cargo across impossible distances. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, remember that their voices still echo in the darkness. Every breath you take, every thought that dances through your mind, every moment of wonder at the world around you, carries within it the spark they kindled so long ago. The fire they lit still burns, will always burn, as long as human hearts beat beneath the stars. Rest now, and let their ancient dreams become your own.